a missing voice, a sliced truth, and one deadly deli. Welcome to Marple Inquiry. I am your host, Montague. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Drop it in the comments. Your presence brings life to every mystery we tell. Let's start. It started with a knock, soft, civilized, and just peculiar enough to make me raise an eyebrow. The kind of knock that sounds like it's apologizing for disturbing a man in his sanctuary, which in this case was exactly what it was doing. Wolfe was at the time halfway through an argument with a particularly obstinate variety of orchid, or so I gathered from the string of guttural syllables I heard before he buzzed me up to the plant rooms. He was trying to explain to a Paphiopedilum hybrid why its leaves lacked discipline. I was trying to finish my coffee while reading the Times, which meant we were both performing miracles in our own way. The knock came again, softer, too soft for a delivery boy, not hesitant enough for a process server, and not desperate enough for a client in real trouble. I closed the paper, rose and opened the door. She was about 50, petite, with an upright posture that suggested ballet training or an expensive upbringing, and maybe both. Her eyes flicked past me into the house like she was measuring the shadows. She wore grey. Not the fashionable kind, actual grey. Wool coat, simple scarf, no lipstick, and a clutch that looked like it had been clutched to death. "I'm sorry," she said with a voice like linen folded in a drawer. "Is Mr. Wolfe in?" "That's a controversial question," I said. "Depending on whether you're asking physically or philosophically. He's home, but accepting interruptions only. If they're medically urgent or gastronomically relevant." Her lips tightened. "This is neither, but it is personal." That got me. Not because Wolfe was fond of personal cases, he hated them with the heat of 1,000 flambés, but because he always took notice when people used that word with reverence, like it was code for something unspeakable. I held the door. "Come. And don't touch anything sharp or French." She stepped in carefully, like the floor might collapse under the weight of her decision. I took her coat, gestured to the red chair in the office, and hit the button that summoned the man himself. 10 minutes later, Wolfe entered with the reluctance of a pope stepping into a punk concert. She stood instantly. Wolfe lifted a hand. "Please sit. Mr. Goodwin?" "Name, purpose, and emotional baggage, if you please," I said as I pulled out my notebook. She glanced at both of us, exhaled. "My name is Agatha Sorrel. I'm the niece of Lorenzo Bazzini. You may know him." "He owns Bazzini's Delicatessen on Mulberry Street." Wolfe's left eyebrow raised exactly 1 millimeter. "I am acquainted with the establishment." I should mention here that Wolfe's idea of acquaintance involves consuming half a wheel of something sharp and Italian, with 2 fingers of beer and an argument about phenol ratios. Agatha Sorrel pressed her clutch tighter. "My uncle has stopped speaking. Completely. For 6 days. He comes to the store. He slices salami. He makes no sound. I gave her my best don't tell me this is it look. Lady, if I stopped talking every time I was annoyed, I'd be the neighborhood hero." "No." She turned to Wolfe. "You don't understand. He's afraid. Something happened, something bad. He won't say it, but I know, and now someone's watching the store. That did it." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, and he shifted slightly in his chair. "Which, for Nero Wolfe, is the equivalent of a man leaping out of a plane with a flamethrower." "I see," Wolfe said quietly. "You are asking me to investigate the silence of a man known for his sausage. He's more than that. He's proud and stubborn, but not foolish. If he's scared into silence, then someone is threatening him. Or worse." Wolfe grunted. "Why not the police?" She looked down. "Because the last time they came, he gave them nothing, and they made it worse. They asked questions in front of customers. 2 days later, the back window was broken. My uncle said it was kids. It wasn't kids." Wolfe closed his eyes. I waited. 10 seconds later, he opened them again. "Mr. Goodwin, I will take this case. I blinked. You will? I will. Miss Sorrel, you may leave your contact number with Mr. Goodwin. I will require all details concerning the last week of your uncle's behavior and business transactions. She nodded, visibly relieved. But, Wolfe added, eyes still on her, you will not presume that my interest arises from sentiment. I have no taste for sentiment, but I do have a taste for salami, and silence in that context is both unnatural and inexcusable. Agatha Sorrel left the brownstone like she'd entered it, quietly, almost guiltily, as if her very presence had chipped a tile in the sanctity of Wolfe's carefully tiled world. I stood at the door for a moment after she left, watching her walk away without looking back. She had the air of someone who'd told the truth, but hadn't yet unburdened it. When I turned back into the office, Wolfe was already reaching for the beer button. Fritz must have known it was coming, because the sound of the tray elevator rattled down the shaft, like a loyal butler sprinting on cue. I waited until Wolfe had poured the first inch into his glass before saying, "So, you're taking cases based on sausage now." He didn't bother to look up. Silence is a form of protest. When it is not, it is concealment. Mr. Bazzini's case appears to be the latter. Either way, it is unnatural and demands scrutiny. Not to mention you've eaten his soppressata every Sunday since 1957. That got me a glance. Dry, annoyed, brief. Miss Sorrel is not unintelligent, he said. Her concern was neither hysterical nor vague, and she was precise. The silence began 6 days ago. A human being does not fall into voicelessness without cause. Unless he's married. You are vulgar. I'm resourceful, I said, crossing to my desk. And speaking of that, I'll start with the deli. Get the lay of the cold cuts, see who's watching from across the street, and maybe sneak. So I glance at Bazzini's ledger if I charm the right relative. Wolfe nodded once, already tilting his head back for a long pull of beer. Case open. I left the house an hour later with the usual tools of my trade: notepad, 2 pens, a camera in, my coat pocket, and a smile I could turn up or down depending on the temperature of the person across the counter. The train ride to Mulberry was uneventful, unless you count the man in the corner who sang Sinatra to his reflection. The deli sat on the corner of Mulberry and Prince, a narrow old storefront with green awnings and a faded gold-leaf sign that said Bazzini's fine Italian provisions. The windows were clean, and someone had taken the time to arrange the meats in symmetrical rows behind the glass: pancetta, mortadella, coppa, and 24 varieties of salami lined up like medals on a general's chest. Inside, the air smelled like salt, vinegar, garlic, and history. I stepped in. 3 customers waited in line, and behind the counter stood a tall, square-jawed man in his early 30s, wielding a slicer like he'd been born with it. He wasn't talking either, but it wasn't fear, just focus. His hands were steady and his face gave nothing away. Off to the side, toward the back room, a smaller man hovered. Thin, balding, mustache the width of a toothpick. He glanced at me once, then down again at the counter, where he was folding paper napkins with mechanical precision. I waited until the last customer left before stepping up to the counter. "Beautiful display," I said, tapping the glass. "That Finocchiona could be in a museum." The slicer stopped. The younger man looked up. "Thanks," he said. "We cure it ourselves." "Then it's criminal you don't charge admission." I gave him the kind of grin that opens doors. "Name's Archie Goodwin. I'm working with Nero Wolfe." His eyes flicked upward at that, just enough to confirm he knew the name. The mustached man in the corner went stiff. "Wolfe," the younger man said. "The detective?" "That's the one. We're not investigating your meats. Relax. We're interested in your uncle." He looked at me hard for a second, then laid the knife down. "I'm Marco Bazzini. My uncle's not here." I noticed. "You the one slicing in his place?" He nodded. "Since Tuesday." That's the day after he stopped speaking. Marco didn't answer, which was an answer. I leaned on the counter. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. Your cousin, or maybe aunt. Agatha Sorrel came to us. She's worried." "She should be," said the mustached man in the back, finally speaking. His voice was reedy but sharp. "Lorenzo's not the kind to spook. Something's wrong." Marco turned, not sharply but with authority. "Franco, that's enough. I'm just saying, she came to the right people. Maybe you should listen." I turned to Franco. "You're a relative?" "Cousin, been working here 30 years. Marco wiped his hands with a cloth and walked to the end of the counter, closer to me now. "Look, I don't know what my uncle told Agatha, but he's fine. He's just keeping to himself." "That's a nice way of saying he's scared and hiding something." Marco narrowed his eyes. "You a doctor?" "No, but I have a specialty in nervous deli owners. Humor me. When's the last time he spoke to you?" He hesitated. 6 days ago he left without locking the back door. Didn't answer when I called after him. Since then he's been showing up, slicing in silence, and going home early." "Where's home?" "Upstairs, 2nd floor." "Anyone been visiting?" Marco gave a half shrug. "Vendors, a health inspector maybe. A couple guys in suits came in on Thursday. Didn't buy anything. Just asked for him, then left when he wouldn't come out." Franco made a clicking noise with his tongue. "Big guys, dark suits, no names." "Mob?" Marco's jaw tightened. "This isn't the 1950s. "No, but extortion never goes out of style," I said. "And deli owners aren't exactly known for unionizing. What about the back window? Broken?" Marco didn't answer. Franco did. I swept it up myself. Wasn't a kid's rock, it was surgical. Someone wanted a warning sent. "You tell the cops?" "Lorenzo told us not to." "And you listened?" Marco stepped in again. "He's our uncle. This place is his life. If he says stay quiet, we stay quiet. Even when the silence is louder than a scream." That landed. Marco looked away. "Can I go upstairs?" I asked. Marco hesitated, then nodded toward the back. "Be quiet. He's not been himself." I went. The staircase creaked, like it had a confession to make. At the top, a hallway branched into 3 doors. One was ajar. I pushed it gently. The apartment was small and neat, borderline obsessive, not a thing out of place. A single plate in the dish rack, a table with no crumbs, and 3 books stacked precisely on the armrest of a worn green chair. Lorenzo Bazzini sat in that chair. He was thin, older than I expected, maybe 75, with white hair combed back and a face carved from olive wood. His eyes were alert, too alert. They locked on mine, unreadable but sharp. "Mr. Bazzini," I said gently. No response. "I'm Archie Goodwin. Nero Wolfe sent me." Still nothing. I stepped closer. His gaze didn't waver, but his hands gripped the chair arms. "I don't mean to intrude, but if someone's threatening you, we can help. Your niece came to us. She's worried." His lips pressed tighter. His eyes flicked once toward the window, then back. I walked to the window. Nothing but a fire escape and a brick wall across. The alley. But someone had taped a piece of paper to the inside of the glass. I peeled it back. It was blank. No, it had been blank. But when I tilted it toward the light, faint pencil indentations caught the angle. I couldn't read it yet, but I knew what it was. A message, left in silence. I pocketed it, nodded once to Bazzini, and left him in his chair, staring out at a world that had, for some reason, gotten too loud to speak into. Back at the bottom of the stairs, I passed Marco, who was busy pretending not to watch me. "I'll be in touch," I said. Then I walked out of the deli and back into the New York air, where everything felt a little louder, a little sharper, and a little more off-kilter than it had an hour ago. Time to get back to the brownstone. Wolfe would want that paper, and Wolfe, I knew, would not be silent for long. By the time I stepped into the brownstone again, Fritz had just finished ironing the linen napkins and was headed back toward the kitchen with the kind of calm efficiency that would have made a neurosurgeon feel sloppy. He paused long enough to raise an eyebrow at the slight smear on my jacket shoulder, probably from brushing the deli's back wall on my way to the fire escape, and then vanished before I could pretend to care. I didn't waste time. I made straight for the office where Wolfe was already in his chair, his fingers laced over his middle like he was holding court with an invisible jury. He didn't look up as I entered. "Tell me," he said simply. I dropped into the red chair. "Mulberry. Street's intact, but Lorenzo Bazzini isn't. He's up there in his apartment sitting in a chair like he's on a stakeout for his own life. Eyes like razors, mouth zipped. Didn't say a word, not even when I dropped your name." Wolfe grunted. "Not unexpected. But I did find this." I reached into my coat and produced the folded paper I'd lifted from his window. "There's writing, or was writing, on this. It's been erased, maybe intentionally, maybe not. But the impressions are still there." That got his attention. He extended a hand and I passed it over. He took it gingerly like it might carry a pathogen and tilted it toward the lamp at his side. He muttered. "Pencil, medium pressure, single page atop others. Can you read it?" "No." He frowned as if that fact personally offended him. "But it can be restored." Fritz appeared so fast I suspected he'd been hovering just outside the door in case dinner was rescheduled. "Wolfe," he said, "set up the kitchen table with a wide lamp and the heavy tracing paper. I require the graphite shavings and soft tracers. Mr. Goodwin, you will assist no more than 10 minutes. We do not sully the food preparation space longer than that." "Yes, General," I said, but he was already rising slowly, heavily, and heading out. The kitchen experiment was a quiet, tense affair. Wolfe didn't like improvisation, especially where food or evidence was concerned, and I didn't like him breathing over my shoulder. But with a soft brush, some painstaking rubbing, and the contrast of an angled light, we managed to raise 3 short lines from the indentations. The first line said, "They want Thursday." I said no. The second, "Marco doesn't know. Franco, maybe." The third, fainter than the rest, "Use the red tin." Wolfe stared at the page like it had insulted his ancestry. I read it again twice and felt the tension knot behind my eyes. Marco's the nephew, runs the counter now. Franco's the cousin, folding napkins like he's covering up blood. So either Lorenzo's being leaned on to do something this Thursday, or something's going down Thursday and he doesn't want to be part of it. "Use the red tin," Wolfe murmured. I nodded. "That's the part that smells. A signal? A stash spot? A hiding place?" "Or," Wolfe said, "a method." Miss Sorrel said nothing was missing, only that her uncle was frightened. Perhaps something has been added. That gave me a pause. "You think someone planted something at the deli? Or requested he do so, he refused. Thus the visitations, the window, and now this paralysis. So what's in the red tin?" "That, Mr. Goodwin, is your next." "Herond," I stood. "You want me to find out what's in it?" He nodded once. Delicately, "You are not to frighten the man further. If Mr. Bazzini is withholding information out of fear, overt pressure will only tighten the lock." I took the note and slid it into a folder. "What if I can't find the red tin?" He gave me a look fit to pickle a cucumber. "You are a professional investigator. Do not make me regret pretending otherwise." With that, he waved me off and turned back toward the office. The interview was over. The mission was clear. The second time I walked into Bazzini's, I didn't bother pretending I was browsing. Franco was still at his corner, folding napkins like a Zen master with a dark secret. Marco glanced up from behind the slicer, his face neutral. "You're back." "I forgot to buy olives," I said, "but really I came to ask a favor." He leaned on the counter. "You're going to ask about my uncle again, aren't you?" I gave him a nod. "Yeah, and about a red tin." His expression didn't change. That was impressive, but I've watched con men bluff through bank fraud with more blinking. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maybe. But maybe you should ask yourself why your uncle would write that phrase down as a last resort. He glanced toward Franco, who was now pretending to organize coffee filters. "Look," I said, lowering my voice, "I don't need to make a scene, but if that tin is dangerous, or if it holds something someone else is willing to break windows, Wolf's going to find out. I'm just the guy who saves time." Marco swallowed, then slowly came around the counter. "Come with me," he said. He led me into the back storage area, where shelves were stacked tight with cans, boxes, and tubs of ingredients. A small fridge hummed in the corner. On the middle, shelved to the left of a large crate labeled anchovy paste bulk, was a red tin. It was small, metal, about the size of a large cigar box. Unlabeled. Marco picked it up, stared at it. He told me never to open it, just to keep it out of sight. Did he say why? He just said, "If anything happens, give it to Agatha." I stepped forward slowly. "I'm here on her behalf. Let me take it to Wolfe." He hesitated. Then, with a reluctant nod, handed it over. The tin was heavier than I expected. "I don't know what's in it," Marco said, "and I'm not sure I want to." "That's the first honest thing I've heard all day," I said, and left before either of us could change. Our minds. I took the tin straight to the brownstone, wrapped in 2 layers of newspaper, and tied tight with a string Fritz lent me, though not before raising both eyebrows and a handkerchief to the idea of bringing a deli relic into his kitchen. Wolfe was waiting. I placed the tin on his desk and stepped back. He examined it, didn't touch it. "Open it," he said. "Why me?" "You're younger." "Nice." I undid the string, peeled back the paper, and popped the lid. Inside, nestled between layers of butcher paper, were 3 objects: a small black USB stick, a folded envelope marked with the letter S in bold ink, and, of all things, a strip of paper containing a list of names. Wolfe reached for the list, scanned it. "Mr. Goodwin, these names are not random." He passed it to me. I read down. One of them jumped out, then another. I blinked. 3 of these people are city food safety inspectors, I said, and one's on the mayor's restaurant advisory board. Wolfe nodded grimly. "I suspect," he said, "Mr. Bazzini has been sitting on more than fear. He has been sitting on blackmail material, and the pressure to act, or to stay silent, has begun to squeeze. And the USB? We'll see, but I strongly suspect we have just opened the throat of this mystery." I nodded. "So now what?" Wolfe closed his eyes and leaned back, his fingers steepling under his chin. "Now, Mr. Goodwin, we shall determine who stood to benefit from Lorenzo Bazzini's silence, and why, of all things, they chose Thursday." He opened his eyes again. "Call. Saul Panzer." I called Saul Panzer from the hallway because Wolfe didn't like outside voices inside his walls unless they were delivering groceries, confessions, or rare cheeses. Saul picked up on the second ring, his voice low and dry like someone who knew too much about the inside of other people's closets. "Panzer." "Archie. You in town?" "For the moment. I've got a salami shop on Mulberry Street, a mute proprietor, and a red tin filled with more secrets than a priest at a poker table. We're trying to find out who's applying the pressure and what the payoff is." "That's vague. I like it." "Good. We've got a name list. City officials, inspectors, a guy from the mayor's food advisory board. I'll send them over. See if any of them have recently developed new interests in Italian meats, real estate, or off-the-books income." He grunted. "Done. Timeline? Fast. Someone's planning something for Thursday. I want to know who knew what, when they knew it, and whether they bought a new watch in the last week." "I'll call you by midnight," he said, and hung up. Saul's version of a good-night kiss. Back in the office, Wolfe had the USB drive plugged into his personal laptop, something he rarely used and only under duress or irresistible provocation. Seeing Wolfe hunched slightly, eyes narrowed at a screen, was like watching a symphony conductor pick up a trumpet. Not his usual method, but when he used it, the results were worth noting. He didn't speak until I sat down. "The drive contains documents," he said. "Scans of forms, reports, letters, some real, some forged. Inspection schedules, violation notices, even a memorandum from the Department of Health bearing a signature I strongly suspect is counterfeit." "So blackmail material," I said. "On who?" "Multiple parties, including the 3 inspectors on the list you read. Mr. Bazzini appears to have acquired, or been handed, a collection of falsified regulatory documents implicating key figures in systematic corruption." "Lovely. So someone's been doctoring health reports for cash, and Lorenzo stumbled onto the buffet." Wolfe nodded. "Or was given the buffet. These documents weren't collected casually. They are too neat. This was curated. A package. Which means someone wanted him to have them. The question is, what was he supposed to do with them?" "Deliver them," Wolfe said, "to someone else, perhaps as leverage, or as payment. Which brings us back to the red tin. Use the red tin." He was being instructed, not reminiscing. "Correct. It is possible Mr. Bazzini was selected as a conduit, an innocuous delivery route in a familiar setting, unlikely to draw suspicion." "Old man behind the counter slicing mortadella. Who'd look twice?" Wolfe grimaced, which meant he agreed, and was disgusted by it. "I believe Thursday is the scheduled date for an exchange, a handoff perhaps, or a demonstration of compliance. The parties involved likely assume Mr. Bazzini has remained silent, and that he will perform his part. But he's scared stiff, and his niece called us, which means their plans already compromised." "Indeed. So we must determine what they expect to happen Thursday, and which of the interested parties is orchestrating it." I leaned forward. "You want me to go back to the deli?" "No, not yet. We must provoke reaction. Apply subtle pressure and observe who flinches." "You're thinking of a trap." "I am thinking of a signal," Wolfe said. "We have something they want. We will let them believe we may use it improperly, and we will see who comes forward to correct that mistake." I grinned. "You're going to poke the Salami syndicate with a stick and see who yelps." Crude but accurate. He tapped a page of the printed list from the USB. "This man," he said, indicating the top, "Peter Mondelli, Food Safety Division, 2-year record of unflagging approval for suspiciously borderline establishments, and he was spotted at Bazzini's last Thursday. He's our first rat." "Notify him," Wolfe said, "that a private inquiry is underway. Do not disclose the source. Imply connections. Suggest an audit is being considered and documents have emerged." I was already halfway to the phone. "Wolfe," I said, pausing with the receiver in my hand, "what if this isn't just about dirty inspectors?" He looked up. "Go on. What if it's not extortion or blackmail? What if it's positioning?" He studied me for a moment, then gave a small, rare nod. "Yes, this feels political. City contracts, food licenses, influence over which businesses open or close. That's more valuable than cash." He leaned back, temple pulsing with thought. "Then the documents are leverage. The meeting Thursday is not merely a delivery, it is a test. Someone is proving loyalty or control, and Lorenzo was supposed to be the proof, but he refused, which means someone else must now compensate." I called Mondelli's office under the name Carlton Wythe, a fine alias with a vague British accent I hadn't used in years, and hinted that certain irregularities in past inspections were now part of a private review for a forthcoming report. I made sure to mention a few dates, drop Bazzini's name and reference a memo dated January 12th, which was just ambiguous enough to unsettle him. He hung up 5 minutes later, rattled and unusually polite for a man facing professional. "Death planted the seed," I said, returning to Wolfe. "We'll see who comes knocking." He grunted approval, then closed the laptop with the sort of solemnity reserved for funerals or fishmongers who sell frozen trout. By dinner time, we had our first bite. The doorbell rang at precisely 6:58 p.m. Fritz, who had been preparing veal. Blanquette, with an expression of religious devotion, opened the door with a towel over one shoulder and a knife in his other hand, not for threat, just for parsley. A man in a charcoal grey coat and thin-rimmed glasses stepped in, glancing around, like someone who expected the furniture to take notes. He introduced himself as Alan Vogler, City Legal Liaison to the Department of Health. "I believe Mr. Wolfe is expecting me," he said. Wolfe wasn't, but he didn't say so. He simply gestured to the yellow chair, didn't rise, and folded, his hands as Vogler sat stiffly. "You were not summoned," Wolfe said, "which makes your presence informative." Vogler swallowed. "I understand there's a matter under review concerning regulatory records. My office was informed, informally." "By whom?" Vogler hesitated. "I'd prefer to keep that confidential." "Unacceptable." Vogler shifted. "It was Mondelli. He said someone called, mentioned a memo and an audit. He thought someone was trying to dig up old garbage. No offense." "None taken," Wolfe said. "Why are you here?" Vogler cleared his throat. "Because if what Mondelli says is true, then there's a serious risk to the integrity of multiple city offices. We can't afford a public scandal. Then you should not engage in activities that cultivate one. Mr. Wolfe, if there are documents, there are. And if those documents fall into the wrong hands, they already have." Vogler paled. Wolfe leaned forward one fraction of an inch. "You are here to retrieve them. I'm here to offer resolution." "Your resolution," Wolfe said, "requires payment, silence, or both. I am not interested in either. What I want is a name." Vogler blinked. "Whose name?" "The one who orchestrated this, the one behind Thursday." He paused. "If I give you that name, what happens?" "That depends," Wolfe said, "on whether Mr. Bazzini walks into his store Thursday morning alive and free, or not at all." Vogler looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I'll be in touch." Wolfe didn't answer. After the door closed, I let out a low whistle. Well, that was dramatic. "He will return," Wolfe said. "Men like that don't bluff in person unless they're desperate, which means Thursday's no longer just a deli drop. It's a deadline, correct? And if we wait, we might watch the whole thing unravel." Wolfe gave a slow nod. "We are no longer investigating silence, Mr. Goodwin. We are tracking the architects of deceit, and they are about to discover what happens when Nero Wolfe decides to speak." Thursday was now less a day on, the calendar and more a deadline inching closer, with a knife under its coat. Wolfe didn't rise early that morning, he never did. But the night before he'd skipped his customary second bottle of beer and told Fritz to serve breakfast an hour earlier than usual. That, in our house, was the equivalent of a DEFCON. Warning. I'd spent the better part of Wednesday following up on Vogler. Saul had turned in a list of transactions and contacts that painted the man as a middle-tier fixer, too discreet to be sloppy, too connected to be harmless. He wasn't the boss, but he was the one you sent to deliver uncomfortable messages in nice suits. He wasn't dangerous in the shoot-you sense, more the bury-you-in-paperwork and regret variety. A functionary who moved other people's money and made sure nothing ever traced back to the source. That meant one thing: there was still a source, and we hadn't seen them yet. Thursday morning I updated Wolfe with everything we'd pulled. Mondelli hadn't returned to his office, and 2 of the names on the inspector list had quietly called out sick. One had reportedly flown to Miami on a pre-approved leave, though no one could say who approved it. Convenient. Wolfe listened in silence, then finally opened his eyes. "Mr. Goodwin, today you will go to Bazzini's and remain there. From open to close, I require observation. Record all entries, particularly strangers, uniformed agents, and any car that parks across the street longer than 5 minutes. You think they're going to try something in daylight? No. But they expect something. They've built a machine. And when one gear stops turning, the others jam, I finished. All right. I slid my notebook into my coat pocket and headed out the door. Wolfe may not have believed in action, but I've always felt better when I had shoes on pavement. Found something in my jacket besides lint. By the time I got to Mulberry, the deli had already opened. Marco was behind the counter again, sleeves rolled up, slicing prosciutto so thin it looked like stained glass. Lorenzo wasn't visible, but I caught a glimpse of movement upstairs behind the curtain. I gave Marco a nod and walked in. He didn't greet me, but he didn't look surprised either. "You staying all day?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, like Santa Claus watching, maybe making a list." He didn't smile. "You expecting trouble?" "I'm expecting visitors. You've got something someone wants." He paused with the slicer. "You still think it's about that tin?" "I think it's about everything that tin represents," I said. "And today, someone's going to want confirmation that the job's getting done. That means contact. Maybe subtle, maybe not." He nodded slowly. "Uncle's been pacing since dawn. If he sees anyone unusual, let me know." I found a seat at the small back counter where customers sometimes took espresso and sat with a copy of La Repubblica. So I sipped an espresso I hadn't asked for, Marco's subtle way of cooperating, and watched. For 3 hours it was nothing but regulars. Elderly men in hats, mothers with strollers, a guy in a construction vest who ordered pepperoni and left without speaking. Around noon, I caught the first flicker. A man in a grey cap stepped in, didn't buy anything, just looked around for a few minutes, then left. He returned 10 minutes later, stood outside and lit a cigarette. Didn't smoke it, just held it, watched the store. Then he walked across the street and leaned against a lamppost. At 1:15, Lorenzo came down the stairs. He was dressed neatly, coat on despite the heat. His face was tighter than I'd ever seen it, less afraid now, more resolved. He walked slowly to the counter, picked up a wrapped salami that Marco had prepared, and placed it on the edge of the display. It had a red ribbon tied around it. I stood. Marco shook his head once. "Don't." He looked at me like a man who'd spent the last 24 hours praying to someone he didn't believe in. That's what they expect. I watched the door. The man in the grey cap started walking, crossed the street, came in. He didn't speak, just picked up the red ribbon salami, nodded at Lorenzo, and turned to go. I stepped into his path. "Nice." "Gift." He didn't blink. "Excuse me. You forgot your receipt." He stared at me a moment too long. Lorenzo stepped forward, then fast. Faster than I thought he could move. "No," he said. It was the first word I'd heard him say. The man in the cap froze. "You sure?" "No." One word. "Firm." I reached for the salami. The man didn't resist, but his eyes flicked toward Lorenzo. Waiting, measuring. I unwrapped it. Inside was a second package taped tight to the meat casing, paper wrapped flat. I peeled it open just enough to see the edges of one of the forged inspection reports from the USB, one Wolfe had flagged as crucial. "Mr. Wolfe sends his regards," I said to the man, "and advises you reconsider your career path." He smiled faintly. "You've made a mistake." "No, but you just did." I let him go. I wasn't about to try a citizen's arrest over fake paperwork, but I watched as he stepped outside, walked briskly to the end of the block, and disappeared around the corner. Not scared. Just done. Lorenzo sat down behind the counter. He looked smaller than he had a moment ago, but no longer defeated, just tired. Marco didn't say anything. He unwrapped the salami, removed the hidden envelope, and handed it to me. "Give it to Wolfe." I nodded. "I'll send someone to keep an eye on the store for the rest of the day." "You don't need to fight alone." That got me a look. Not quite gratitude, not quite defiance, but something close to both. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Saul was already there. Wolfe had called him in. They sat in the office with the envelope on the desk unopened. Wolfe waited until I sat before speaking. Well, he came for it. Midday handoff. Expected no resistance. Lorenzo said no. Wolfe allowed himself a single breath through his nose, a sigh, by his standards, and the delivery? I placed the envelope beside the other documents from the tin. Same type, confirming the connection. This was never about blackmail alone. It was about message control. Someone's consolidating influence using these documents as threats or favors. If Lorenzo had delivered that packet, he would have been marked as complicit, which, Saul added, means the people behind this weren't done with him. They'd have used him again, Wolfe nodded, until he became dispensable. What now? I asked. Wolfe looked at me, then Saul. Now we issue an invitation. He reached for the phone and pressed the button for the kitchen. Fritz, prepare the office. We are having guests tonight. He turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, call Miss Sorrel, Marco Bazzini, Franco. Also Alan Vogler. And, he paused, add Peter Mondelli. They will all come. And tomorrow the silence ends, for good or ill. By the time the clock struck 7, the office was prepped like a courtroom, and Wolfe sat at his desk with the expression of a man preparing to gut a trout with words alone. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, tight enough to keep everyone within conversational reach, but loose enough to imply impartiality, Wolfe's version of psychological feng shui. I'd called the necessary parties, all confirmed. Or, rather, no one dared refuse. Fritz, who had preemptively cancelled dinner and decanted a bottle of something red and consoling, kept glancing at the door like he expected someone to burst in with a subpoena. I assured him the only weapon being used tonight was Wolfe's vocabulary, but I'm not sure he found that reassuring. The first to arrive was Miss Sorrel. She came in composed, wrapped in a navy shawl, her eyes more wary than before. Behind her were Marco and Franco, both quiet, both visibly unsure of what they'd just walked into. Marco gave me a sharp nod. Franco kept his hands in his coat pockets, like he was holding on to excuses he hadn't decided whether to use. Then came Alan Vogler, same impeccable suit, same legal panic posture. But tonight he wasn't alone. Peter Mondelli arrived with him, smaller in stature than I expected, with a necktie that screamed government-issued anxiety. His eyes moved around the room like he was cataloguing exits. Wolfe didn't rise. He never did. Please be seated, he said without looking up. They did, some reluctantly. Marco sat beside Agatha. Franco leaned forward on the edge of his chair, like he wanted to bolt, but was too proud to give Wolfe the satisfaction. Vogler crossed his legs like a lawyer in front of a hung jury, and Mondelli sat stiff as carbon steel. Wolfe waited until the room settled. Then he spoke. You are all here, he began, because of a silence, one that was not merely personal, nor cowardly, nor convenient, but cultivated, protected, fed by fear and by strategy. Mr. Bazzini's silence was, in fact, the result of pressure. The sort of pressure that intends to make a man complicit in a crime not yet fully committed. Vogler opened his mouth, but Wolfe lifted a hand. No, you will all remain silent until I permit you otherwise. If this offends you, you may leave, but you will not interrupt. Vogler closed his mouth. Wolfe turned to Agatha. Miss Sorrel, you first brought this matter to me. You suspected your uncle's fear was not mere withdrawal. You were correct. She nodded once. He still won't tell me what they threatened him with. Only that it was bigger than him. It was, Wolfe said. Lorenzo Bazzini was recruited without consent as a courier, a dead-drop facilitator in a small, unassuming deli. Documents were prepared, not just falsified inspections, but politically explosive material implicating multiple parties in a pattern of regulatory manipulation and enforcement bias. He turned to Vogler and Mondelli. These documents were stored in a red tin. Mr. Bazzini was instructed to deliver a particular packet of them this morning. He refused. Marco shifted in his chair. Franco stared at the rug. Vogler licked his lips. Mondelli's hands twisted in his lap. This refusal, Wolfe went on, was not just inconvenient. It was a risk, a break in pattern. And pattern is the lifeblood of conspiracy. You have all been actors in that pattern, some wittingly, others not. But I am now in possession of the documents, the full set. That made Mondelli flinch. Wolfe saw it. I am uninterested in petty scandal. I am, however, interested in motive. In particular, the individual who initiated this operation, who positioned Vogler as liaison, Mondelli as shield, and Mr. Bazzini as mule. That person is in this room. The air tightened like a string pulled taut. No one else knew when the red tin would be deployed. No one else had both access to regulatory data and the connections to arrange anonymous deliveries. And no one else has shown more concern for the fate of those documents than Mr. Vogler. Vogler didn't speak, but I saw it. The half-second flash in his eyes. The recognition of being named not as a servant, but as a maestro. You engineered this, Wolfe said. You constructed a system of silent compliance. Bribes were too obvious. You opted for implicit debt, subtle favors, forged leniencies, and invisible threats. And when your operatives wavered, you used men like Mondelli to apply pressure. Vogler sat back slowly. You have no proof of that. I do not require proof, Wolfe said. I require plausibility. You see, Mr. Vogler, I do not intend to prosecute you. I intend to break you. That got everyone's attention, even Fritz, hovering in the hallway, stilled. I intend, Wolfe continued, to release the documents, unredacted, to a neutral third party. A retired judge I trust implicitly. He will in turn send them to 3 separate agencies simultaneously, each with a stamped record of the time and date. You can't, Mondelli started. I can, Wolfe said, and I will, unless I am given reason not to. He looked at Marco, then Agatha. Lorenzo Bazzini is to be left alone. No further contact, no retaliation, no reminders. Any pressure applied to that family will be interpreted as a breach of our arrangement. Vogler said nothing, but his shoulders sagged, and in return he asked finally. Wolfe allowed himself a small exhale. In return, he said, this remains a local scandal. No press, no public hearing, and no salami stuffed with subpoenas. That broke the tension just enough. Marco gave a small, shocked chuckle. Agatha looked like she might cry. Franco blinked twice, then rubbed a hand down his face. Wolfe turned his gaze on Mondelli. You will resign quietly. Effective tomorrow. I have prepared a statement. You will sign it. Mondelli nodded, eyes glassy. Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Goodwin, the envelope. I handed it over. He passed it to Vogler. That is the copy. Do with it what you will. The originals are secure. If Mr. Bazzini is harmed or harassed or contacted again, they will be released with full context and commentary. Vogler stood slowly. You're blackmailing me. I am protecting my client, Wolfe said, with the same thoroughness. You attempted to destroy him. Vogler left first, then Mondelli. Neither spoke another word. When the door shut behind them, the brownstone was quiet again. Marco broke the silence. You think it's over? No, Wolfe said, but it is contained, and sometimes containment is the best we can offer. Agatha stood. Can I tell? My uncle, it's safe now. Wolfe nodded. He will still be watched, but not pursued. They will retreat cautiously. Franco ran a hand over his hair. I thought it was just rumors. I didn't know it went that far. No one ever does. Wolfe said. Until it's almost too late. After they left, Wolfe leaned back and shut his eyes. I poured him a beer without asking. He took it without comment. That went smoother than I expected, I said. You didn't even raise your voice. I didn't need to, he murmured. The truth, Mr. Goodwin, is louder than all of them. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the city kept moving, oblivious, but inside the brownstone, justice had been served. Quietly, thoroughly, and without spilling a single drop of mustard. Dinner that evening was a subdued affair. Fritz served braised lamb with rosemary and potatoes that had been coaxed into golden perfection, and Wolfe barely noticed. That was the first sign the case had left a mark. The second was that he didn't complain when I poured him a second glass of beer without asking. He drank it slowly, eyes drifting toward the office, as if the room still held ghosts. I didn't press. You don't ask Nero Wolfe how he feels about moral ambiguity, or the weight of justice served off the record. You wait, you watch, and when the beer is gone and the silence lingers too long, you make a remark ridiculous enough to reset the world. I was thinking of writing a novel, I said. Salami and silence. A deli noir. You'd be the brooding philosopher sleuth, and I'd be the plucky war hero with a knack for sandwiches. He gave me a look that could have melted wax. Must you? I must, especially when there's a lull. You know how I get when there's a lull. There is no lull, Wolfe said. There is aftermath. He stood with the grace of a man who preferred sitting, and we moved back to the office. I followed, more out of instinct than obligation, and settled into the red chair. He remained standing, a rare pose for Wolfe, and usually a sign that something was still gnawing at him. You think Vogler will hold? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said, but only because I gave him no alternative. He could still try something stupid. He won't. Men like Vogler don't gamble unless they've bought the dealer, and tonight I showed him the deck is mine. I nodded, then hesitated. Still, there's something bothering you. Wolfe scowled. Of course there is. I waited. It came, slowly, like a reluctant confession. The documents were curated. Yes, but not merely for leverage. They were designed to build a case. Internally, I sat up. You mean the documents weren't created by Vogler, they were given to him? Yes, I felt my jaw tighten. So Vogler was the architect of the delivery, but someone else laid the foundation. Wolfe nodded. And that person remains unknown, which means we did not stop a conspiracy. We interrupted a transaction. That put a cold hand on the back of my neck. So Vogler's a middleman after all. An ambitious one, a useful one, but not the origin. He sat then heavily. The chair groaned in relief. Which brings us to the matter of the envelope. Marco handed you at the deli. I blinked. The salami package? Yes. The secondary one. You passed it to me and I examined it. It was meant to look like a decoy, but it was not. It was authentic, and unlike the other documents, it included a name that doesn't appear anywhere else. He slid a single page across the desk. I picked it up. At the top, in typed block letters, was a title: Provisional Licensing Strategy, 4th Quarter, Candidate Partnerships, and under it, a list. 3 names. I read the first 2, then I saw the third. Edgar B. Costello, I said aloud, Deputy Commissioner of Municipal Affairs. Wolfe closed his eyes, as if that name alone explained the universe. I had Saul check him, he said. His office doesn't fall under food regulation, but he controls discretionary budget approvals for urban redevelopment. And urban redevelopment means new licenses, permits, restaurant openings, vendor contracts, food program grants. Everything Vogler and his peers were maneuvering to influence. I looked again at the page. Candidate partnerships, I repeated. You think Costello's the source? Wolfe's tone flattened. I know he is. Only a man with that level of control could compile the material and designate its use. Vogler was his tool. Mondelli, a cog, the red tin, a test run. I frowned. So why wasn't Costello at the brownstone tonight? Because he doesn't know I know, Wolfe said. Not yet. I leaned back. You're planning something. Of course I'm planning something. I do not enjoy being used. There was a pause. Then he looked at me and the corners of his mouth twitched, a smile but only by technicality. Tomorrow morning, he said, you will go to Mr. Costello's office. You will present yourself as a man recently employed to investigate a regulatory breach. You will not mention me, you will mention Vogler. And if he bites, then I will summon him here. And this time, Mr. Goodwin, we will have the sauce in the room. It was nearly midnight when I turned in. I slept badly. Dreams of red tins and broken windows, of lists that reshuffled themselves every time I blinked. At dawn I showered, shaved, suited up and headed into the city, my mind already building the script Wolfe had sketched. Edgar B. Costello's office was downtown, in a city building with marble columns that smelled like bureaucracy and cleaning fluid. His assistant was a polite man named Trevor, who wore tortoiseshell glasses and offered coffee like it was currency. I declined. Trevor led me into a modest office with deep carpets and a painting of a river no one in the city had ever seen. Costello sat behind a walnut desk, heavy-set, clean-shaven, with eyes that held nothing, no warmth, no suspicion, just a kind of rehearsed stillness. "You're Mr. Goodwin," he said. "Hear about the complaint?" I let that hang a moment. "Yes," I said. "There are discrepancies in the Bazzini case, some pressure points involving inspection protocols. Your name came up in association with procedural review. Did it?" He didn't blink. His voice was neutral. He reached for a pen and clicked it twice. "Do you have documentation?" "No," I said, "but I have motive, and pattern, and a list of officials that got a little too cozy with the people you fund." His hand stilled. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" I smiled. "Nothing, yet. But if there's anything you'd like to clear up before others get involved, now's the moment." He paused, then leaned back in his chair. "I believe this conversation is over." "Not quite," I said. "I've been asked to deliver an invitation. Nero Wolfe would like a word." That got him. A flicker, no more than a half-second, but it was real. "I'm busy." So was Peter Mondelli. He's no longer employed. His jaw tightened. "When?" "Now, or I return with something more formal." "You won't like it." A long pause. Then, "Give me the address." I did. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was seated in his chair, eyes closed, listening as Fritz described a stubborn cassoulet. I said, "He's coming." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Good, have the yellow chair ready, and Fritz, hold dinner. The real meal arrives shortly." Costello arrived at 6:05, punctual in the way powerful men are when they don't want to seem eager. His coat was camel wool, tailored, too heavy for the weather, but perfect for the illusion of gravitas. He paused at the threshold of the office, letting the room take him in as much as he took in the room. That told me all I needed to know. He'd walked into 100 rooms like this, expecting to be the smartest man in them. This time, he wasn't even second. Wolfe didn't rise. Naturally, he gestured to the yellow chair with one hand and kept the other resting on the arm of his own like a lion swatting flies with a glance. "Mr. Costello," Wolfe said. "Please sit." Costello did. He crossed one leg over the other, glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. "I'm told this meeting concerns my name appearing on a document of questionable provenance." "It does," Wolfe said, "but let us not begin with pretenses. You are not here out of curiosity. You are here because you suspect the document is not only genuine, but actionable. And you would like to know how much I know, how far I intend to go, and whether it can be contained." Costello didn't flinch. He folded his hands. "If you know who I am, Mr. Wolfe, then you know I've spent 20 years making sure my hands remain cleaner than the people I supervise. No kickbacks, no payouts. I don't touch money." Wolfe nodded. "Precisely. You are not a thief. You are a tactician, and a tactician does not steal, he arranges. He paused. You arranged the documents. I had no involvement with... Wolfe overrode him. You compiled them, you sourced them, through intermediaries, through favor, through threat, and you compiled them into a blackmail matrix designed not for extortion but for exchange. You don't want money, you want loyalty, leverage. You give a man a promotion, then hand him a file showing how easily he can be removed. You tighten the chain without ever calling it a leash. Costello stared. His face didn't change, but something behind the eyes tensed. A calculation, perhaps. A reassessment of the man seated before him. I stayed quiet. Wolfe didn't need my help for this part. This was theater, and I was just a houseplant with a notepad. Costello said, "That's an elegant theory, but it's still a theory. You can't prove I did anything illegal." Wolfe nodded. "Correct, but I don't need to. I merely need to show that you endangered a civilian for political gain. That you funneled falsified records into the hands of a man you believed too small to matter and too frightened to talk. That man chose silence over complicity, but I chose to listen." Costello tilted his head. "Bazzini. Yes. A man you never met, who you used, who you exposed to risk." There was a beat. Then Costello spoke, and his voice had changed. It wasn't the smooth, professional tone of the bureaucrat. It had dropped, sharpened. "You've made your point. What do you want?" Wolfe's eyes glinted. "A promise, and an end." Costello leaned forward. "Be specific." "You will dissolve the initiative currently in place to expand regulatory jurisdiction over small food vendors. You will bury the proposal that would create aggregate safety audits through contracted third parties, an effort, I believe, designed to open a gate for firms you control through silent partnerships." Costello blinked. "How do you—" Wolfe waved it away. I read. A pause. "And? You will ensure that Mr. Lorenzo Bazzini, and anyone connected to him, receives no further visits from your agents, your intermediaries, or your proxies. If a health inspector visits, it will be with legitimate cause and proper scheduling. If a permit is delayed, it will be for reasons consistent across all applicants. And in return, I do not make your file public. I do not send it to the press. I do not place it in the hands of your rivals, who would love nothing more than to watch you fall." Costello stared. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, with the kind of reluctant grace found only in men who understand the limits of their own power, he nodded. "I can do all that," he said. "But if this comes back—" "It won't," Wolfe said. "Unless you make it." Another pause. "I underestimated you," Costello said. "Many do," Wolfe replied. "They often regret it." Costello stood, adjusted his coat, and left without another word. The door clicked shut, and Wolfe finally let out a long, slow breath. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then, "He will keep his word, not out of honor, out of preservation." I leaned back. "And that's it? You're satisfied?" "I am never satisfied, Mr. Goodwin, but I am, in this case, resolved." I rubbed the bridge of my nose. "So let me get this straight. We just dismantled a hidden influence racket, neutered a political maneuver, protected a family deli, and put a deputy commissioner on a leash." Wolfe allowed the corners of his mouth to lift, barely. "Yes, without filing a single report." Wolfe closed his eyes, as if tired of explaining things to children. "Justice," he said, "is not always served by courts. Sometimes it is served by clarity." I stood, stretched, looked around the room as if it had changed shape in the last hour. "Dinner?" I asked. "Fritz may serve." I headed for the dining room, but stopped just before the door. "You know, Wolfe, I think Lorenzo would have forgiven you if you'd used this case to get a lifetime discount on Salami." Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "I already have a lifetime discount, Mr. Goodwin. I simply prefer not to pay with guilt." And with that, he reached for his beer, and the world for the moment righted itself. Fritz served the cassoulet with the reverence of a priest presenting communion. It was rich, smoky, and laced with just enough garlic to make a man forget the rest of the world. Wolfe ate in silence, thoughtfully, not moodily, and I took that to mean the case was still rattling around in that big orchid-fueled brain of his, even if the formalities had concluded. You don't pull strings that deep into the city's power grid and expect them to fall limp without a twitch. "I still say we missed something," I muttered between bites. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, but didn't look up from his plate. "You frequently say that when you feel intellectually dislocated." I chewed for a moment, then gestured with my fork. "Look, I don't mean we missed evidence. We had what we needed to corner Vogler, and Costello gave ground faster than expected. But the way Lorenzo responded, the silence, the fear, he wasn't just worried about strangers showing up. He knew something we didn't press." Wolfe dabbed at his mouth with a linen napkin and finally met my eyes. "You believe he withheld something, don't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. After dinner, I made a call. Marco picked up on the second ring. "He's better," Marco said before I could ask. "He actually whistled this afternoon. It was terrible, but it was something." "That's good." There was a pause. "He's still not talking about it, Archie. He says it's over, but when I asked if he'd go back to full hours, he just shook his head, like there's something still watching him." "I'll stop by tomorrow," I said. "Let him know Wolfe doesn't charge for peace of mind." Marco gave a quiet laugh. "That's the biggest lie I've heard all week." "Fair." The next morning, I took the long route to Mulberry. The sky was the color of unshaved steel, and the sidewalks had that May dampness that tricks you into thinking summer's around the corner, even when it's still biting at your ankles. The deli looked the same, orderly, understated, old world, solid. Franco was at the register, sorting receipts like he was auditioning for a role in a tax documentary. Marco was slicing something pink and paper-thin for a regular who never looked up from his phone. Lorenzo wasn't behind the counter. Marco caught my eye, nodded me toward the back. I found Lorenzo upstairs, standing by the window. He'd traded his usual apron for a charcoal grey sweater and dark slacks. The light made him look older, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, less frail, more deliberate. He saw me and nodded once. "You said no," I said. "That took more guards than most people have left after 60. Lorenzo turned from the window. His voice, when it came, was low and dry, but it didn't crack. I said no too late. I moved to the small table and sat. He stayed by the window. Too late for what? For the first man they came to. A baker. On Forsyth. I frowned. "There was someone before you?" He nodded. "He ran a small shop. Best olive rolls in the borough. They came to him with the same package, same idea. Deliver this to that. Quietly. He took it. He didn't ask. They said it was political, safe, and he disappeared." I blinked. "Disappeared as in they found his bakery empty on a Monday morning. Nothing touched. Oven still warm. His coat on the hook. He was gone. Never heard from again." My stomach dropped an inch. "Why didn't you say anything?" Lorenzo shrugged. "Would you have?" He had a point. They said it wouldn't happen to me. That the bakery man had violated some rule. Opened something, asked a question. I was smarter, they said, safer, Italian, old school, reliable. They used your pride. He smiled, faint and bitter. They knew how to pick men, and how to silence them. But they didn't count on Agatha. She said you were stubborn. She said that because she is too. I leaned forward. You told her just enough. More than I should have, less than she needed. I stood. If you ever change your mind, If there's more you want to say, Wolfe won't charge for the listening either. That almost got a real smile. As I left the deli, my mind wouldn't let go of the baker. A ghost in the machine, not just a cautionary tale, an early casualty. It was a chilling reminder that Wolfe's clean victories often hovered just inches above the bloodier groundwork someone else had paid for. Back at the brownstone, I filled Wolfe in. A baker, he mused. Of course. He fits the pattern. Quiet, independent, trusted. Wouldn't be questioned if he showed up at a zoning office or left a packet with a clerk. And when he asked the wrong question, he became a liability. Which means Costello's list might be longer than we thought. Too long, Wolfe said. We cannot investigate every name. No. But we can remember the ones who never got the chance to talk. He sat back, eyes narrowing slightly. Not the squint of confusion, the look Wolfe wore when the ledger of justice refused to balance. He was a warning, Wolfe said quietly, and Lorenzo saw the smoke just in time. You think Costello knew what happened? He permitted it, that is enough. There was a long silence. Then Wolfe reached for his notebook and drew a single line down the center. Mr. Goodwin, he said, I will require one final task. I'm listening. Compile a list. Names, occupations, patterns, from the documents. Cross-reference with known small business licenses in borough precincts over the past 18 months. What are we looking for? He tapped the notebook. We are looking for silence. Men and women who vanished, who withdrew, who shuttered shops without notice. If we find 2 more, only 2, then we have a pattern of disappearance. And patterns, he said, voice tightening, demand exposure. I nodded and grabbed my coat. There was work ahead. No police reports, no headlines, but maybe, if we were lucky, closure. Because sometimes a case doesn't end when the last deal is made. Sometimes it ends when you go looking for the ones who never got to say no. It took me the better part of 2 days to comb through the files Wolfe gave me, which he referred to as the seeds of suppression, with his usual overdramatic flair. What he meant was, inside the pages of doctored permits, falsified inspections, and blackmail-ready dossiers, there were patterns, not just in content, but in who they were intended to target. And Wolfe, with a precision I'd grown to expect, but never envy, wanted every thread followed. The stack of papers looked dry, bureaucratic, the kind of material that would have put a city clerk to sleep and made an accountant salivate. But buried in there were 27 names, small business owners, each tied to low-level regulatory infractions, most of which had been mysteriously waived, rewritten, or reassigned without any formal appeal. Out of those 27, 6 had closed their businesses in the last year, 3 had relocated without forwarding addresses, and 2, including the baker from Forsyth, had simply vanished. That was the word that kept coming up. Vanished, not filed for bankruptcy, not cited. Not evicted, just closed up, cleared out, disappeared. A record of existence replaced by silence. I returned to the brownstone late in the afternoon, still carrying the weight of that last name. Emilio Pineda, grocer, 113th Street, vanished February. No forwarding, no family contact, no open claims. Just a shuttered shop and a landlord who'd said, one day he was gone. Wolfe was in the plant rooms when I arrived. I waited. You don't interrupt him up there unless something's on fire, and even then, you might want to check how close the fire is to the orchids. 20 minutes later, he descended like a philosopher emerging from a sacred mountain, towel over his shoulder, annoyance in his gait. He headed straight to the office without a word. I followed and laid the list on his desk. He scanned it in silence, then leaned back and laced his fingers over his chest. 3. 3, I confirmed. 2 vanished outright. 1 relocated under odd circumstances. That's not coincidence. No, he said. It's instruction. I blinked. Come again? They weren't just used, Mr. Goodwin. They were trained. Part of a system, test runs perhaps, for what they intended to replicate en masse. With the right policy structure in place, Costello's audit plan, Vogler's rollouts, they'd have created a controllable network of trusted vendors, people who owed their position to silence. I paced the office once, then turned. But the ones who vanished? Collateral, Wolfe said, or cautionary tales. Either way, they serve the pattern. Which means Costello knew. Yes, but more than that, it means Costello wasn't just protecting himself. He was testing a framework, and our interference stopped the implementation, not the concept. I felt a chill work its way up my spine. So they'll try again. Of course, Wolfe said, in another form, with new names, new storefronts, new leverage. Then what's our play? We can't tail every deli in the city. Wolfe picked up the list, folded it neatly and set it aside. Our play is documentation, he said. We memorialize the facts, not for exposure yet, but for leverage. And if anyone tries to restart the system, we already have the map. Who gets the map? Not the press, not the mayor, not even the police. He paused. Saul, and... One more, Long Cohen. Wolfe gave me a flat look. Fine, who then? A judge, retired, not politically tethered, one who values precedent. I'll make the selection. He turned to his desk, opened a drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad. You will draft a summary, 2 pages, simple, clear, no embellishment. I will sign it. For the record, yes, for the next man who tries to resurrect the machine and finds it already has teeth. That was Wolfe, never satisfied with a win unless it echoed. Later that night, after the report was drafted, signed, sealed, and passed along to Saul with strict instructions, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with Fritz. He poured me a glass. Of Amaro without comment, the kind of thing he did when a case left its stink on me. Did you ever think, I asked him, that running a deli could be a death sentence? Fritz stirred his sauce. In Austria, he said, the men who served the army generals their coffee knew not to listen, and certainly not to speak. Sometimes food is just food. Sometimes it's the camouflage. That tracked, especially now. The next morning, Wolfe did something I hadn't seen in years. He had Fritz send Lorenzo Bazzini a basket. It wasn't ostentatious. Some cheeses, cured meats, a bottle of red, a card with Wolfe's handwritten initials in the corner. A gesture, not a declaration, the kind Wolfe rarely made. It was delivered in person. By me. When Lorenzo opened the door and saw me standing there with the basket, he blinked. Then, slowly, he smiled. This means it's really over, he asked. Shook my head. No, it means you're not alone anymore. He nodded, took the basket, and closed the door gently. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already in his chair, dictating an orchid report to himself. I stood in the doorway and watched. For a second, you know, I said, we never did figure out what the first man, Pineda, was asked to deliver. No, Wolfe said, but we know enough. Enough to stop it? To delay it, he replied. And sometimes delay is victory. A system like that feeds on certainty. We've made them uncertain. That will cost them more than a scandal. Folded my arms. You ever think you're playing a long game no one else understands? I play the only game worth winning, he said without looking up. That was the end of it for now, because when you work for Nero Wolfe, victory doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with a sigh, a ledger closed, and dinner served hot. It was 3 days after the last move. Wolfe's summoning of Edgar B. Costello. The delivery of our dossier to Saul Panzer. The sealing of records that wouldn't see sunlight unless they were needed as shade. The case, as far as anyone outside the brownstone was concerned, had vanished. No headlines, no handcuffs, no glorious unmasking. Just a quiet shift in pressure, like a storm turning off course because someone, somewhere, had whispered Not yet. Inside, the brownstone, though, the air still held the residue of something unfinished. That morning I found Wolfe at his desk, not reading, not eating, but thinking. He had the unread Times at his elbow and a globe of beer untouched beside it. For Wolfe that was as loud as gunfire. "You're still stewing," I said, dropping into my chair. He didn't answer, so I prodded. "You've already neutralized." "Costello, you've got Saul watching the deeper layers. The Bazzinis are safe. That should be a full meal. What's left?" He turned his head slightly. "The architect." "We just dealt with the architect." "No," Wolfe said. "We dealt with the engineer, the one who drew up the scaffolding, not the one who paid for the concrete." That pulled me up short. "You think Costello's not the top?" "I think Costello is competent enough to build a system, but not bold enough to create one. That requires vision and vanity." "Which you haven't seen." "Correct, I ran through the mental checklist." "Well, who benefits most if the system had succeeded?" Wolfe raised a finger. "Who benefits most if the system failed, publicly?" That changed the calculus. Leaned back, squinting at the ceiling. "So you're saying someone wanted this to fall apart, just far enough to disgrace Costello, to collapse the test, but not so far as to ignite scandal?" "Precisely. It was not sabotage, it was pruning." I blinked. "Then the documents were real, but not leaked by accident. They were released, Mr. Goodwin, planted, with Bazzini, with full knowledge of what might happen next." I stood, began to pace. "So it wasn't just a test run. It was bait." "Bait," Wolfe said, "for me." Now I stopped cold. "Someone wanted you involved?" "Yes." "Why?" Wolfe reached for his beer at last. "Because I am not a sledgehammer. I am a scalpel. And when I expose rot, I do." So cleanly, without setting the house on fire, I dropped back into my seat. "So the whole thing was arranged? To get you to clean house on their behalf?" "Not the whole thing," he said. "Just the unraveling." A long silence stretched between us. The only sound was Fritz in the kitchen, preparing something that smelled like redemption and roasted garlic. Then Wolfe said, "You will call Lon Cohen." That snapped me out of it. "Lon? Why? I thought we weren't going to the press." "We are not, but Lon knows everyone who would benefit from Costello's fall. Ask him for a name, a mover, someone ambitious, recently quiet, a man who would gain access by virtue of removal." I made the call. Lon, being Lon, didn't even need me to finish the sentence. "There's only one man in that tier who's been sniffing around the advisory boards lately. Name's Gavin Roth." "Roth?" "Deputy Chair of Urban Economics. Planning. Young, smart, dangerous. Real smooth operator. Rumor says he's next in line for Costello's seat if the commission votes go his way." I thanked him and hung up. "Wolfe," I said, "we've got our visionary." "Roth. Gavin Roth." I pulled up his file within the hour. Public records, media pieces, quiet board appointments. His name hadn't appeared once in our documents. That was the tell. Real power doesn't write itself down. I printed the file. Wolfe read it once. Said only one word. "Satisfactory. We didn't go after Roth. Not directly. We didn't need to." Wolfe made a single call to a judge he trusted, one of those old-school men whose handshake still meant something and whose book had outlived 4 mayors. That judge called in a favor, a procedural review, a quiet request for Roth to recuse himself from commission votes pending a conflict of interest inquiry. It wouldn't make the papers, it wouldn't derail his career, but it would put him back on the sidelines. And when people asked why, no one would say Nero Wolfe, but they'd know. You don't step on the throat of a system like that and not leave fingerprints, even if you wear gloves made of silence. That night, dinner was served without ceremony. Squab, roasted in cognac, crusty bread, baby greens. I said, "So the game is over." Wolfe wiped his mouth. For now. And the players. He sipped his beer. Some exposed, some warned. The rest documented. And the architect? He set his glass down. The architect, Wolfe said, is unknown only in name. But men like Roth always reveal themselves in time. I raised my glass to time. He lifted his. To precision. And that was it. The case of the silent Salami. Done. Not with a bang, not with a trial. Just with facts, arranged in sequence. Quietly removing corruption one strand at a time. That's how Wolfe wins. Not with applause, but with silence.